Alisa Gumbs, the Executive Managing Editor of Black Enterprise. Welcome to Smashing the Concrete Ceiling, Unique Challenges Faced by Black Women Executives. Despite being well-educated and well-credentialed, Black women continue to face a host of obstacles in ascending to the highest levels of corporate America. There are a lot of reasons why, but more importantly, we want to get to the how we can overcome those obstacles and smash that ceiling for good. So we're going straight to the source, two corporate powerhouses and board directors who are here to share how they did it. Today, we're speaking with Shellye Archambeau, a Fortune 100 board member and the former CEO of MetricStream, and Kahina Van Dyke, also a Fortune 100 board member and the global head of digital channels and data analytics for Standard Chartered Bank. Thank you, ladies, so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I like this crew.
I want to start by giving each of you a chance to tell us about your professional journey. What did you start out hoping to be, and how did your career paths unfold? Kahina?
Sure. I mean, I think that what I started out and how I've journeyed and evolved, I think is probably one of the lessons that we all have to hold with us, that opportunities come and we change as we experience things. But I started out wanting to be in government. I come from a family whose service was really important. And I thought I was going to go down that path. And, you know, I was a political science major, and never saw myself in corporate. But what happened is I actually started working for a business association, which is kind of like a lobbying firm representing business. And I just kind of got the bug of seeing all of these people that I'd never imagined doing really important work and having a lot of influence into economies and markets. And I remember asking very early in my career when I met the first CEO, right? My mother was a writer, my father was an educator. I didn't have CEOs in my family. And I remember saying, oh, he's the CEO of this big company. I said, so, but who does he work for? And they said, well, he reports to the board. I was like, what's the board? And they're like, the board of directors. I'm like, what do they do? Well, they hire and fire and make sure that the shareholders' interests are being represented. And I was like, well, that sounds like a powerful group of people and I never heard of. But it was really interesting to understand that although I hadn't come from anybody in my family, you know, teachers and educators and engineers that were in this corporate life, it was clear to me that the economies of the world and the decisions that were being made were really influenced by corporates. And very early on, because I didn't have any role models, I actually got a subscription to Black Enterprise as a teenager. So I started just looking at different role models and just understanding different pathways. So I probably was the geekiest. All my friends were getting Cosmo subscriptions and I was getting Black Enterprise because I just wanted to see role models of people that looked like me doing really cool things.
Shellye?
Sure, mine was a little different. I'm a whole probably generation older than Kahina, but as a result, when I was coming up, it was really clear to me that the odds just weren't in my favor. So I knew I had to be more intentional to really get what I wanted out of life. And this whole notion about business and all that, I got that view in high school. I was having that obligatory conversation, you know, with the guidance counselor on where do you want to go to college? Do you want to go to college, et cetera? I'm like, yes, college. Why? Because I need a job. Okay, what do you want to do? I don't know. I just want to be able to keep my thermostat at 72 degrees and go out to dinner and travel, right? That was like it. And so she said, well, what do you like to do? And I said, oh, clubs, organizations. I love leading them, running them, French Club, American Field Service, National Art Study, right? You name it. And she was the one who said, well, you know what? Business is kind of like clubs, pull people together to get things done. And I said, oh, okay. In that case, I want to run a business. And when I looked around, the people who run businesses were called CEOs. So I said, okay, that's the job I want. I want to be a CEO. So literally, like 16, I kind of set that as my goal. And I spent my whole career working toward that. So I spent my first part of my career at IBM, rising through the ranks. And despite doing very well, it became clear that I don't know if I'm really going to get a shot at competing for that CEO job. So I worked my way to Silicon Valley, where I indeed got the opportunity to become CEO of a tech company and turned it around and built it into a market leader over the course of 15 years, and then started my board work and advisory work, which you talked about in the introduction.
I'm so glad, Shellye, that you mentioned being intentional, because you don't get to the level of success that you two have achieved without planning for it and actively pursuing it. What are some of the intentional or strategic things that you each did throughout your career to get you to where you are now? And this time, Shellye, I'm going to start with you because you literally wrote the book on being unapologetically ambitious.
So true. Yes. The way I approach things, and honestly, anything, whether it's a professional objective or a personal objective, I say to myself, all right, what is it I'm trying to do or accomplish or create? Then I ask myself, well, what has to be true for me to do it? And in order to figure out what has to be true, I have to do the research, the homework. Kahina talked about it, right? It's like, okay, this board, what do they do, right? Et cetera. So I did the same thing. I'm like, okay, I want to be CEO. So who are the CEOs? Well, I don't see CEOs that really look like me. So what are their backgrounds? What's their education, right? What kind of jobs did they have when they started out of college? What's their lifestyle like, right? I did all that research. And then I said, okay, how do I make that true for me? And that's basically the plan. I said, all right, I need to go to a top tier school so I can get the credibility, right, that's expected. I need to go in an industry that's growing because there are more opportunities in growing industries. That's why I picked tech, right? I mean, everything all along the way, every step was, okay, what has to be true? How do I make it true for me? So therefore, making decisions is really critical because a lot of people will set goals and some people will actually take the time, Alisa, to put plans in place. But I find that very few people make decisions every day, consistent with the goals that they've got and with the plans that they have. And that's where the power really lies, because that's how you build on every step and every activity to keep rising through the ladder.
Kahina, you mentioned earlier following the opportunities or being at least aware of and seeing the opportunities. And I want to ask you specifically about the fact that you've worked all over the world, because that's also a very strategic decision. But what are the ways that you were intentional about advancing in your career?
Well, I knew that I did want to work internationally. I felt that it was important to have global impact and global perspective for two reasons. Number one, because it would set me apart. Right. It was a lot of people talk about going international, but most people don't do it because you know what, like you have to leave all your family and friends and everything, it's not convenient to have an international experience. And so I knew that that's something that I wanted, that I would enjoy learning about other cultures. I would learn about myself. And that if I did do that and I really set forth and did it really well, what it would show people is I have an ability to take risks and adapt to environments. And those are important kind of leadership skills that I think I have a natural tendency. And just to go back a moment, we talked about being intentional. I think what's also important is knowing yourself. What is it about you that gets you really inspired and really excited to jump out of bed? Because, there are models of success, but the most important success and the most powerful success is authentic, showing up in an authentic way. And I know that I loved leading into new ideas and new creations and new cultures. And so I did go international. And the first time I told Citibank that I wanted to go international, and by the way, intentionally, I chose companies. I only worked for companies that were international. So I worked for Time Warner and I turned down 2 other jobs for domestic companies because I was like, if I get a chance, I'm going. And then I went to work at Citibank. And at that time, it was the city never sleeps because they were everywhere. And I was like, well, I'm really going to be able to go international with Citibank. And sure enough, after 2 years, I started saying, I'd like to live international. I'd like an international assignment. They said, no, you need to work here 5 to 7 years before you're even put on that list. And I just kind of ignored them. And I told everybody that I met that, listen, if you hear anything international, and I remember getting the call about 2.5 years in and saying, someone said, I have a 3-month assignment in Brussels. And I'm like, I'll take it. And he said, I haven't told you what the job is. I'm like, I don't care. I'll take it. And so that's what I mean about the opportunities. You do need to state your intention. I feel like Shellye, you have to articulate it. You have to voice it. You can't bottle it up inside. You actually have to say what it is that you want and know what it is that you want to allow people to open doors for you, or allow a door to be creaked open. Maybe they're not opening it and you just kind of, go through it. But I do think that's really important. Knowing what really inspires you to be operating at your best self, and then leaning into that, because as you develop that more and more, you are going to gain a level of confidence, and your uniqueness actually becomes your strength.
I'd like to just add an exclamation point to a couple things Kahina said, because it's so well said. One is about risk taking. She talked about up front, taking risks. Well, risks and opportunities are two sides of the same coin. You don't get the opportunities if you aren't willing to take risks. So you've got to take the risks. It's okay to take risks. As a matter of fact, studies show that people who take risks do better in their career and move farther faster, even if they don't achieve their ultimate goal, right, and aspiration. So take risks. And two, let me tell you an element about international, because I worked international as well. And by the way, did the same thing Kahina did. Told everybody that's what I wanted to do. If you don't tell the universe what you want, the universe can't help you. So let the universe help you. Tell it what you want. But one of the big advantages I found going overseas, which I didn't know about before I went, being a minority is a strength, because I knew what it was like to be successful as a minority every day of my life in the US. So when I went overseas, I was a minority, but I knew what that was like. I knew how to operate. I knew how to be effective. Guess what? A lot of people over there, also on assignment, who had never experienced being in a minority, they assumed that everything they'd done and accomplished and who they were all came with them, and they could just lead. Nope. So it takes time, and therefore I was able to be more effective faster than a lot of my peers. And I bet you Kahina felt the same way. So I tell people all the time, if you're a female or minority, if you've been a minority, you actually have skills you don't even know you have that will actually shine in an international assignment. So go international, leverage and let those skills shine for you.
Amen to that. Shellye just knocked, that is exact. She's so right. And I don't think a lot of people talk about the fact that you will do even better. I found myself, I've never articulated it and heard it articulated it as well as Shellye just put it, that the skills, the same skills of being the other and people not quite understanding who you are, but having to understand who everybody else is, when you go international, all of those skills are flourishing. And I did excel beyond my peers who had always had things given to them because they had a certain level of privilege and a certain level of expectation, and life was just easier. And for me, I found it really, really easy to slot in, whether I was in the Czech Republic, Spain, Dubai, Bangladesh, whatever it was, I could just find a way to slide in and respect where I was and still maintain my own sense. So I think that I always say, I think you'll find in a lot of career trajectories of very successful executives that look like us, that are Black women or Black men, you will see that international assignments have taken them to the next level.
One of the other things I heard when both of you were speaking that I want to underline is the willingness to say no to things and the willingness to do things that are inconvenient. Kahina, you mentioned you said no to a couple of jobs. Shellye, you said you were doing great at IBM. And I'm sure a lot of people thought you were crazy when you were like, I'm just going to take this successful career that I have and throw it away and take a risk and go do something else. And so can you guys talk about the strategy of those two things in your career advancement?
It's so important to keep the prize in mind. And when I say the prize, meaning figure out what is it you're trying to do. I said it right front, I want to be a CEO. So as I was making decisions and deciding on careers and roles, and do I take this job or not take that job, etc., I was looking at what helps me move closer and closer to my overall objective. I cannot tell you how many HR jobs I turned down. I don't even know how many. A bunch. That was not in my path. That's not what I wanted to do, but it's what we get pulled to do often, because people are really comfortable with us. And I say us, I'm talking about Black women, women of color, very comfortable with us in supporting roles. We make great number twos. Why do we make great number twos? Because we work our asses off. So yeah, if we can do that for somebody else, right? Whoa, they're a big winner. We're not. Okay, so keep your eye on the prize and make sure that the roles that you are considering are setting you up for where you ultimately want to go. And if you're not sure, always ask the question when they're offering you a job to say, well, tell me, what would you expect expect would be a natural progression from this role? All right, ask that question. Because otherwise, people end up very unwittingly in dead-end jobs. And what I mean by dead end is not that that's the end of your career, but meaning it's not taking you back to your past, right? It's kind of taking you to a dead end. You can continue to do that and do that for the rest of the career, but you're not getting back on the other path, right? That's what I mean by dead end. So make sure you're keeping your eye on what are you trying to achieve? How does this role position you to do it? And if it doesn't, say no.
No is a full sentence. No. Say it with me now. I just think that it's so important. Strategy is what you don't do is one of the famous lines that I really do believe in. And it's like when you know where you want to go. There's a couple of times in my career where people thought I was crazy. One is I left MasterCard and I had been in financial services, Citibank and financial services internationally for at that point, probably like 16, 17 years. And I left MasterCard to go work at Facebook in Silicon Valley. People thought I had lost my mind. They're like, what are you going to do in Silicon Valley? You don't code. You're not an engineer. You've been working in banking and payments. What are you doing? And for me, it was so clear that the emerging trends that were happening that I was seeing is that banking and tech were going to converge, but it was very early on. Right. And it was a risk. When I did it in 2015, fintech wasn't a cool thing that everybody thinks of as now. So when I said, oh, I'm going to go work at Facebook in Silicon Valley to do financial services at Facebook, people didn't even understand what my job was going to be. And my mother was just like, I don't understand. What are you doing? And why are you going to work for this tech company? But I knew that I saw something. And even if I was wrong, I was going to lean into it and have that full experience. And I think that's the risk taking. And so when people said, no, stay, I said, no, I have to go have this experience. I want this experience in my collection of, tools and skills and everything else. And wow, what an amazing ride. Did I have to learn a lot? Yes. Was it hard to move from a banking culture to a tech culture? Absolutely. But you have to lean in. And when people ask me to do other things, and I will tell you, I could have stayed in some jobs that I said no, and I moved again into a fintech startup with a couple hundred people. I went into crypto. People thought I had completely lost my mind. They're like, wait a minute, now you're at Facebook. Okay, we understand you worked at Facebook. We get it. Wait, now you're going to go work for this company called Ripple and you're going to work in crypto? Like, what is good? But again, what I saw is this emerging technology in blockchain. I wanted to learn, and I wanted to learn from the people who are at the front lines. And sometimes you really do have to follow a path that hasn't been paved in order to follow your own path. And I think that that's something about the risk taking, what Shellye said about risk and opportunity, and saying no to the safe, because someone offered me a very safe job to stay. And I said no from a leader that I really respect and I would have loved to work for, and it would have been super comfortable. And I would have probably worked half as hard. But I followed my gut instinct and I followed a path that was taken. And now I'm back in banking full circle. But all I'm saying with those stories are you are going to have to say no to things that feel very safe. And you're going to have to say yes to things that are really scary.
Right. Let me just add a point to that whole uncomfortable thing. Because one of the things I find happens is people get frankly too comfortable. So they think they're on a path. Right? They have some objectives, they have some goals, etc. And then they start working and get jobs and they start to feel comfortable. The problem with feeling comfortable is you wake up and you're 42, right? 45, 51. And you're kind of like, I'm not where I thought I would be, right? I was supposed to be there. I mean, how did I end up here? And the problem is if you stay comfortable, it means you're not learning. I hate to tell you. Right? What makes you uncomfortable is the fact that you get in situations in which you don't know everything. So if you aren't feeling uncomfortable every 6 to 8 weeks, then you're probably coasting. And if you're coasting, hate to tell you, cars only coast in one direction. Right? So check yourself. Make sure that you are feeling uncomfortable. right? Periodically. And if not, then you need a new job. You need a new responsibility. You need something new. Because at the end of the day, the value of what you bring is what you know, right? And what you have experienced. And if you don't know and haven't experienced more than people around you, then you're just not as valuable. So you got to keep that learning muscle going, and you got to stay uncomfortable.
I just have to, this is probably like, this is the book. This is the next book I want Shellye to write. Because that idea, I had to start associating discomfort with growth. And I say that to my teams all the time, because now I'm kind of a transformation agent of change. Like, that's why people hire me, to change things. I'm one of those people who builds and changes and pushes the boundaries. And what I have said to my team is, if I'm getting a lot of pushback and resistance in a system, I'm like, I must be getting really close to breaking through. And I get more motivated. And because I have made a very purposeful connection between, and I have seen the pattern enough in my own life and other people's life to go discomfort, 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 resistance, change, growth, breakthrough. And then all of a sudden you're at the next level. And I think that's such an important concept that Shellye just talked about. And I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with her.
We've talked a lot about a lot of the internal things that we as Black women professionals need to be mindful of. And I want to talk about some of the things that we face in the workplace. There's a lean-in study from a few years ago that I often cite because I just think that it so clearly illustrates the unique realities of Black women at work in terms of getting less support from their managers, less credit for their work, less access to senior leadership, and less help navigating company culture or company politics. From your experience, what are some of the barriers to advancement in the workplace that Black women face specifically, and how did you each move through them?
You know, I guess I'll start with, it's not so much that people are intentionally putting up barriers. It's not like they say, oh, here comes Shellye, quick, put up the wall, put up the barrier, right? Let's stop her, guys, stop her. No, it's really not, people aren't consciously doing it. But what's happening is we're not getting the proactive help. And so by definition, if other people get proactive help and they're being pulled and you're not, right? That's what creates the challenge. So first step is just, you have to understand the situation you're in. I mean, Black women, I've heard some studies that show that Black women are now the most educated demographic. All right, yet Blendor, a company founded by a Black woman, Stephanie Lampkin, by the way, put out a study earlier this year that showed that in the top 240 tech companies, there's not one Black woman named executive officer. Not one. Okay? So realize this is where we're starting from. Is that fair? No, it's not fair. Life's not fair. Get over it. Don't go looking for fairness. You have to play the cards you're dealt. All right, so fine. I have a crappy hand to start. That doesn't mean that I have to lose this game. I don't. It's now about how I play the cards I've got. So the key is understanding the game, understanding the dynamic in which you're operating so that you can start to do things to increase your odds, right, to perform. And it starts with simple things. Kahina talked about one, making people aware of what you want. I can't tell you how many people don't. You know, they'll come to me for advice. You know, one day I'd like to do X, Y, Z. How do you think I should approach it? Blah, 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 right? And I'll say, great. Well, who else knows that's what you want to do? And I kind of get the look. So what do you mean? Like, well, who have you told that you want to become a chief marketing officer or a CEO or whatever it is? And they're kind of like, well, nobody, or maybe a mentor or a spouse. Or, no. You have to tell people what you want. There's no way people can help you if they don't know what you want. All right. So first, you got to tell people what you want. And I don't even walk around saying, hey, I'm going to be CEO, so get in line. You better support me. No, nobody wants to work with people like that. Right. But it's actually easy to create environments in which you tell people what you want to do without making them uncomfortable. You say things like, you know, Kahina, one day I aspire to be a CEO. Do you think I have the potential? Right? Now, what have I just done? I've told them what I want in a non-threatening way, and I've asked them for a perspective. And by asking something like, do I think I have the potential? People always say yes. That's an easy yes. There's no commitment on their end, right? It's easy for them to say yes. So of course, plus You're in their company. They hired you. You must have had potential. Well, once you do that, it's almost like fishing. You know, they just bit on the hook because now you get to say, wonderful. What steps do you think I should take? What experiences should I be going after? What skills should I be building? Right? And now they have to give you advice because they just told you had potential. So they got to tell you something. All right. So I'm just saying there are ways to tell people what you want without it being an in your face, right, demand. So tell people what you want. And then second, you are your own advocate. So get out there. Studies show people with mentors do better. Less than 20% of people of color actually have mentors. Go adopt some mentors, right? Read my book. I tell you how to do it. Go adopt. Don't wait for people to offer. Don't ask people. They just tell you no. Just adopt them, okay? And then make sure that you're a good mentee. Because I find that if you're a good mentee, you follow up with people, you let them know how you're doing, you thank them for advice. A lot of times a mentor can turn into a sponsor. And then they start pulling you. And they take credit for you. Oh, yeah, Kahina? Oh, yeah, she is good. I give her advice from time to time, right? They want to take credit for you. Fine. You want everybody taking credit for you because everybody's talking about you. And they want to see you do well because you reflect well on them. And next thing you know, they're sponsoring you up. Oh, have you thought about Shellye for that project? What about Kahina for this, right? Alisa would be great, right, on that team. So there's so many things you can do, but you have to be proactive. You can't wait to be pulled. You have to realize that people may not be pulling you. So you've got to be proactive. Handle the cards you've got. Play with the ones you've got. They're good. You're educated. You're smart. You're capable. You work hard. You can do what you want to do if you're intentional about it.
Yes. Yes. And what I would say is one thing I had to get comfortable with was knowing my value. So early in my career, it was like the one thing, the studies are, we're the most educated, but we make 40% of what a white man makes for the same job. So if I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist at the same hospital, and I'm a Black woman, gone to the right schools and et cetera, right there, my white male colleague on average is going to be making double of what I make. That's just statistics. That's just not, it's just statistics, right? We know that. So the reality is that you are going to be under, not because of who you are and what you've done, just naturally the system is going to undervalue you. And I think for the first 10 years of my career, I didn't understand that. I guess it's too big for me to understand. And it's like, yes, the system is unfair, but I'm good. I'm sure all of my people are taking care of me. And it happens kind of incrementally. And I'll never forget the moment where I was hiring somebody that used to work for me, who was a man. And he said at another company, I was at another company now, and he said, and it was time to get the offer together. And he goes, I'm so sorry, I have to tell you how much I was making, because I knew that I was making double of what you were making back then. And you worked 3 times harder than me. And I feel terrible about this, Kahina, but this is my salary. And he literally was making more than double than what I was making. And I was supporting him. I was doing my job. I was helping him do his job. And I was shocked. I was like, you mean everybody knew I was underpaid except for me? I was it was one of those moments, but I'm grateful for that moment, because what it taught me is I needed to understand the market value for the role, not how I was being perceived or how people were thinking I was valued. What was the market value for the role? And that gave me a very different perspective. So the next time I was going in for a negotiation or a new role, I actually did a PowerPoint presentation of kahina.me.com. What are all the things that I did in my previous role? I launched a new country for the bank. I launched this product. It was the most profitable product in the company. We won an award for this over a 5-year period. This business grew to be this big. And so I actually had to have all of those facts, right? And I do have to say, I like being in banking because it has a metric associated with it. I like being in roles where I can say, we did this, and this was the business impact this year and projected out multi-year. So I think keeping your own understanding what you're contributing, there's a dollar associated with it, a value associated with the company, making sure that what you're doing is strategically important to the company. And then it's a very easy conversation, because you're like, I did these 4 things. They delivered X, Y, and Z. The market value for this role at other companies is this. I like it here. So can you make sure that I'm taken care of and that I'm in this range of value. And I think that that was something that took me a little bit long to understand. I wish I'd known it earlier, but I definitely think that you have to understand that these are not individuals who are out to get you. It's a systemic problem of racism and sexism that has a lot of work from the past and a lot of work in the future. But how do you approach that in a very factual, analytical, and strategic way to make sure that you're getting paid what your market value is?
Speaking of systemic, we've had a couple of milestones this year with Black women as CEOs. When you look at Tashonda Duckett at TIAA or Roz Brewer at Walgreens, but in general, the numbers for Black women are abysmal when you look at the highest levels of corporate America. What do corporations need to do to make sure that we're getting those opportunities and those roles?
Companies need to make sure that there's actually sponsorship happening. You know, one of the pieces of advice that I give CEOs is everyone on your leadership team, including you, ought to be sponsoring at least 2 people that don't look like you. Just sponsor 2 people that don't look like you. So which means you have to find 2 people to sponsor. And if you can't find 2 people to sponsor, you better go hire somebody. All right. So, but what that does is 2 things. 1, it forces them to go look for talent proactively. 2, they get to learn some of the experiences and things that are going on from a lens outside, right, of their normal lens. And 2, it's the right thing to do because now you're able to develop a broader set of talent, right, within the overall organization. Because listen, at the end of the day, most leaders, as you start to get to the highest levels, you're judged not just on your ability to execute, drive business, the whole bit, but you're also judged on your ability to create more leaders. Right? On your ability to actually identify talent, promote talent, get talent leverage. I mean, because if you're not able to do that, you can't possibly lead big organizations. So sponsoring people who don't look like you is a great thing to build into the development plan, right? The performance expectations, because this is a way to demonstrate, can you actually do this as you're rising through the organization? So I think it's important to come top down, the idea that you set expectations around sponsorship, right? As one example.
Yeah. So I have to say that Roz and Tashonda reaching the levels that they reached after 10 years of not having a single Black woman as a CEO of a Fortune 500. By the way, we only had one before that, felt like a win for all of us. And I know that sounds like a really heavy thing to say, but it was so in your face that as much as we've accomplished, as educated as we are, we're in the workforce, we're, you know, the college education rate among Black women exceeds all other groups. And yet still, we were not reaching the top level. And you have to understand, 25 years ago, when I started in corporate life, they told me that there was a pipeline issue, but it would be solved by the time I got there. 25 years later, I'm here to tell you, it's not a pipeline issue. We have the talent in the pipeline. They are not being pulled through. And they're not being pulled through because of a lot of, you know, issues that we have in our society and a lot of perspectives that people have around how they value your contributions versus what your actual contributions are. But what I do think is really important is that we all have to be aware of the fact that having teams that are not diverse, that do not have cognitive and experiential diversity, are not high performing teams. And that when you see a team that is all one person and all one type of person, that means that mediocrity sits at that table. And so if we have a world where we understand that cognitive and experiential diversity brings value, which, by the way, study after study of Accenture, Deloitte, McKinsey, whoever you want to call it, more diverse teams bring better business outcomes. I challenge my colleagues, I challenge the CEOs, I challenge the boards of the biggest companies in the world to stop allowing mediocrity to be at the table. As my grandfather used to say, if you keep fishing from the same pond, you're going to start getting smaller and dumber fish. And that is what everybody needs to wake up to, because mediocrity has become a norm and an expectation, and we all deserve better. And that means people from everywhere, the entire talent pool, ocean needs to be considered. And then you have the best people at the job. But I think that's the dialogue that has to change.
There are a couple of other really timely things that are going on right now with Black women and the workplace that I want to hear your opinions on. The first is that we're in what has been dubbed a she session, as opposed to a recession, where during the first 10 months of the pandemic, women lost more than 5 million jobs. And in December, Black, Hispanic, and Asian women accounted for all of the jobs lost, with 154,000 Black women dropping out of the labor force entirely. Why are Black women so vulnerable to these job losses, and what can we do about it?
I know this time around was different from the financial crisis, in that the COVID and the pandemic really hit home people who don't have those safety nets, nor resources, relationships, whatever it is, to help with childcare. You say, why did it happen to all these women? Well, what happened is kids weren't going to school. And it's against the law. You actually can't just abandon your kids and say, well, listen, you fend for yourself. I'm going to work and I'll check on you later. 100 years ago, people did that, okay? You can't do that now. So plus they have to study. They're doing Zoom, they're doing remote. Well, who's going to manage all that? And women in our society are still the expected gender when it comes to dealing with all that. And so nobody should be surprised that this is what transpired. And when you look at what's required as we go forward to ensure, we don't have situations like this, et cetera, many other countries of our economic means have much more stable, supported childcare options, right? We don't have that here. Healthcare options, because whenever you're dealing with all things that are happening with health, you have to stop and take care of people. People were in hospital. All these things. No, all that falls back to family. And then Black women in particular, we indeed have more single working mothers, right? And how do you balance all that? You can't if you don't have, right, the help and the resources to be able to do that. And during COVID, you couldn't even bring in help if you had access to help. So it should not be a shock to people that these are the groups that got the most impacted. Let me tell you what is shocking to me, though. We know who the women are who stepped out. We know who they are. Every company knows who left, right? And they're all like wringing their hands. We lost all these women. The whole bit. Okay, well, guess what? We are hiring now. Well, we know who they are. Why aren't we going out to them to say, welcome back, right? So yes, we could have this blip, and was it horrible? Absolutely. Should we want that? No. But could we actually be doing some things to proactively now help at least get them back on ramp faster? Yeah, we could, if we were intentional about it.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back, Shellye just put it beautifully, but it's, I know when my 9-year-olds didn't go to school and trying to work while they're at school, and I have a supportive environment, I was going a little crazy. I got to tell you, there was moments I was like, I got to get these kids back in school. They're driving me crazy. But the reality is we're more vulnerable. Why is it affecting us? Because we're more vulnerable, because we get paid less. We have less resources for, big situations like, what we all just faced over the last year to year and a half. And, financially, and socially, just having people who can just step in. Shellye mentioned, if you're a single mother and you got 2 kids, under the age of 10, and depending on what job do you have and how confident do you feel, and how are they service jobs, or are they jobs that you can actually do something remotely? We're the most vulnerable part of the population. We're the most underpaid part of the population, although we are the most educated and I would say the most resilient. We got impacted. So, it's no surprise that we are being hurt the most in a crisis, from a healthcare perspective, from a financial perspective, and from an employment perspective.
And we over-indexed in all the roles that were considered essential, right? Essential workers. And therefore had to show up physically, right? Despite all the risk, again, had to show up physically. It's like, well, wait a minute, I have to show up physically, but I have all this stuff to do. I can't, how do I do both? So we got it coming from both ends. Told, oh, you're most essential, but we can't support you.
The other thing that's been in the news a lot lately is the debate around remote work. There was an article just last week that remote work has been a good thing for many Black women because of the fact that they get to quote unquote escape workplace racism by avoiding daily microaggressions or showing up authentically, especially as it relates to their appearance. But then there have also been articles about the potential long-term damage of remote work for Black people specifically, because it offers even less visibility than we had in the office and even less access to the social networks. So, from your perspective, what do Black women who are trying to balance this now really need to be mindful of?
I don't know, Shellye, what your thoughts are. I have to tell you that this has been for me, an unprecedented time of like leadership, of trying to learn how to lead virtually, because I have global teams and 50% of my leadership team are women, 50% are men. They're all over the world, and trying to create team culture and team intimacy and understanding, having my finger on the pulse of what's going on with my folks when you only see them on these small screens is definitely more challenging than when I was able to, even if they were in my office, or travel to the office and take them to lunch and find out, what's going on with their families, everything else. So we've had to learn to lead differently in COVID. And I think that there's some parts of it that will never go back. But I'm a big believer in the hybrid model and the power of face-to-face. However, there is a flexibility. I will say that the social networking aspect of work is important. It's always been important. The old boys network, as they called it, were just guys who used to meet up together, whether they had dinner or go on vacation or whatever else. It's like that social networking is an important part of developing sponsors, developing visibility. And so I think that that's hard to do virtually. And I don't think we're going to be forever in this place, but as much as you say, it's funny that you thought about, you could avoid the microaggressions, but you also don't see who's talking to who on a Monday morning about their, the golf game that they had or XYZ. So you're lacking in information if you don't have already those established contacts. So I think a hybrid model for me is more beneficial, especially if you're going to be, you might be marginalized or you might not be in the core group, and you might have to work harder at that. So I think we're going through a new adjustment, and I don't know where it's all going to turn out, but I do think you have to be very mindful that contact becomes important. And I use WhatsApp a lot, right? I'll send little notes to people and say, hey, how's it going? What's up? Did so-and-so told me that this is going on. So I try to create that virtual conversation as a leader, but also I do the same thing with my boss. I do the same thing with my peers, right? And so I have to be much more intentional. I haven't talked to that person in 10 days, one-on-one, not in a group, but one-on-one. And so I think being intentional about that is something that is important for us to keep in mind during this time of transition.
Kahina really hit on it. This is new for everybody, right? I mean, 3 years ago, nobody was thinking that we'd actually be in a situation where the majority of companies would actually be considering hybrid work environments where people work at the local, they work at office, work at home, et cetera. Unfathomable. So because we're all learning, when everybody's going through a learning phase at the same time, it's really important to be open-minded, to be adaptable, and to be what I call listen really, really hard. Because there will be unintentional challenges and situations that arise as a result of this. And the Kahina on one, out of sight, out of mind, that is still very real. All right, it is still very real. So therefore, if you are an employee who can now work remote, 80% of the time, maybe 100% of the time, that's fine. But you now own the responsibility to be seen, to be remembered, to be heard. So you have to figure out proactively, how are you actually going to do that? Don't just keep operating and think, if I put my head down and do my job, it's all going to work out. It's not. Never. Hard work, ambition, and putting your head down has never gotten anybody anywhere. Hate to tell you. They lie when they say that's what you need to do. No. Yes, you need to do all those three things, but you also need to be strategic and intentional, and you need to make sure that people know, right, what you're doing. So if you're all remote, you have to really think through how you're going to do that. And then as leaders, Kahina touched on this as well, but as leaders, it's really important to think through, how am I going to create an environment that's going to foster this? because corporate culture is not just the 5 things listed on the wall. Corporate culture equals behaviors. Full stop. I don't care what you say. It equals how people actually behave. Well, a lot of how people get inoculated into the culture is by watching how other people behave. How do you treat? How do you communicate? How do you respect? How do you write? They're looking for cues. So if you don't have the ability to share those cues in informal ways, you have to figure out formal ways, right, of making sure that those things are being communicated and that you don't create a 2-class citizenship where people who come to the office regularly and those that don't, right? So what are your practices going to be? You can't have meetings where everybody's in person and 3 people are on the screen, because those people on the screen, they're going to feel differently. Maybe it's 2 people have to be on the screen. I don't care if we're all together. Everybody has to be on a screen, right? And you have to figure out how are we going to think about this? How are we going to do things so we intentionally try to level, right, that field so everybody has a fair shot? Because I'll tell you, there was a study done by a tech firm in Silicon Valley, just surveying employees to say, okay, how many of you want to come in the office regularly, want to come in the office sometimes, want to never come in the office? All right. Well, never come in the office was like 40%. All right. 4% was come in the office regularly. The rest hybrid. Whoa. Then when they looked at it, the data on never, right, and hybrid was overly skewed for people of color and women. Well, people of color and women already have challenges. Being seen, being heard, getting heard. So now you add the thing where, okay, now I get all the remote work issues. It's just going to add more challenges. So we have to be really intentional what we're doing here to make sure that that doesn't over skew and over index and make it even harder for us to rise.
Well, I wish I was not getting the wrap it up sign. I have millions more questions for you, but I have to thank you both. I appreciate that you both have been so very candid and so very thoughtful in talking about your experiences and what we as Black women need to really be mindful of, intentional about, and strategic about when we're talking about that ceiling, which for us has been a concrete ceiling, unfortunately, instead of a glass ceiling. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for watching.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great. Thanks.
Thank you, Alisa, for that powerful conversation. And thank you for joining us for today's Corporate Board C-Suite Summit, brought to you by Black Enterprise, the #1 Black digital media brand. I hope you found today's content to be informative, relevant, and actionable. As such, I would like to thank our amazing group of speakers, business leaders, and corporate veterans who shared valuable insights and success strategies as part of their dynamic presentations. I would also like to recognize and extend our deep appreciation to our sponsors, AT&T and Nationwide, for making their investment in today's summit. You have also been an outstanding audience. Your engagement and participation proves critical to making this event a smash success. If you missed or would like to replay any session, you can gain on-demand access to all summit content on blackenterprise.com. Also, for more information on Black business leaders in corporate governance, watch our monthly video series, Boardroom Chats, presented by Nationwide, and don't miss our upcoming Boardroom Power Report, which will feature the 2021 BE Registry of Corporate Directors, our exclusive listing of Black board members of S&P 500 companies. Lastly, be on the lookout for the all-new Black Enterprise Town Hall series, Closing the Wealth Gap, which will highlight our powerhouse roundtable, Voter Suppression, how Black business leadership will protect and preserve our franchise, on Tuesday, July 27th. You do not want to miss a minute of this provocative, solutions-based conversation with foremost leaders from corporate America, business, politics, and social justice. In closing, stay safe, stay strong, and continued success with your professional and business pursuits.